The Billion-Dollar Lies, a deep dive into white-collar crimes. Money, power, deception, behind the closed doors of the world's biggest corporations, inside lavish penthouses, and within the most exclusive boardrooms. Crimes are committed every day, but these criminals don't wear masks or carry guns. They wear designer suits, sign legal contracts, and manipulate numbers on a spreadsheet. White-collar crime is an invisible epidemic, costing economies billions of dollars each year, but rarely making the headlines like violent crimes do. Unlike a bank robber, these criminals often walk free, leaving behind shattered businesses, ruined retirements, and entire industries in turmoil. We will unravel the most notorious white-collar crimes in history. Fraudsters, Ponzi schemers, corporate scandals, and financial crimes so massive they make heist movies look like child's play. We'll expose the masterminds, the victims, and the psychological profiles of these high society criminals. From Enron to Bernie Madoff, from insider trading to cyber crimes, we begin our journey into the dark side of corporate world. White-collar crime isn't new. In fact, one of the first recorded financial frauds dates back to the 1700s with the South Sea Bubble, a speculative investment scheme that collapsed, ruining thousands. Fast forward to the early 20th century, and we see some of the most infamous financial frauds emerging in America. Charles Ponzi, 1920s. Charles Ponzi was the mastermind behind what would become the most infamous scam in financial history, the Ponzi scheme. He promised investors a 50% return in just 90 days by supposedly profiting from international postal coupon arbitrage. In reality, he was paying old investors with money from new ones, a classic hallmark of a Ponzi scheme. By the time his empire collapsed, he had scammed over $20 million, equivalent to over $300 million today, from thousands of unsuspecting investors. But Ponzi was just the beginning. His name became synonymous with fraud, but others would take his blueprint and scale it to billion-dollar levels. Here, we analyze some of the biggest corporate frauds of the 20th and 21st centuries. Enron, the energy giant that lied, 1985 to 2001. Enron was once America's seventh largest company. Through accounting loopholes, shell companies, and fake revenue reports, it falsely inflated its value. Investors, employees, and pension holders lost everything overnight. CEO Jeffrey Skilling and Chairman Ken Lay orchestrated one of the biggest financial fraud in history, using mark-to-market accounting to make losses appear as profits. Impact led to the downfall of Arthur Andersen, one of the biggest accounting firms, and triggered reforms in corporate governance. Narrator: Enron wasn't just a fraud, it was a warning. But did Wall Street listen? No, because just a few years later, an even bigger con would shake the financial world. Bernie Madoff, the $65 billion Ponzi scheme, 1990s, 2008. Bernie Madoff, a respected financier, promised consistent high returns through an investment strategy he never actually used. For decades, he faked profits, using money from new investors to pay old ones. The 2008 financial crisis exposed the scam, leading to the biggest Ponzi scheme in history. Thousands lost their life savings, retirement funds, and billions in wealth overnight. Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in prison, but the damage was irreversible. The case of Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street. Stratton Oakmont manipulated penny stocks, tricking investors with pump-and-dump schemes. Belfort and his firm scammed investors out of $200 million while living a life of extreme wealth, drugs, and luxury. Stock manipulation isn't just illegal, it destroys lives. The 2008 financial crisis and subprime mortgage scandal. Major banks gave out risky loans to people who couldn't afford them. These loans were bundled into mortgage-backed securities and sold as safe investments. When the housing market crashed, millions lost their homes and the economy collapsed. Impact. The U.S. government bailed out the banks, but the public paid the price. The dark web marketplace Silk Road allowed anonymous drug transactions using Bitcoin. Its creator, Ross Ulbricht, ran an empire worth millions before the FBI took it down. NFT and crypto rug pulls. Modern Ponzi schemes have evolved into crypto scams, where fake projects raise millions and disappear overnight. With no regulation, investors lose billions. White-collar criminals rarely face the same justice as violent offenders. Why? Because their crimes are hidden behind legal jargon, complex financial structures, and corporate protections. The system protects them, and the victims are often left to suffer in silence. But make no mistake, fraud is a crime. Whether it's a billionaire CEO or a hacker behind a screen, the damage is real. As we move into a future driven by AI, crypto, and digital transactions, white-collar crime will evolve. The question is, will we be ready for it?
The 17th floor was kind of hidden, and I started hearing about this other business that Bernie Madoff had, and I would see him bring up these clients, or they all look like these successful type of people, and Bernie would show them around, and everyone would kind of, I'd hear little whispers about it, and then people would say, well, if you think this is successful, his other business is even more successful. I'm like, really? Wow. So then as I made more money, I thought, maybe I could ask Bernie him to manage my money because, obviously I thought so highly of him. And when I asked him, he kind of made it seem like he would think about it. He wants to keep it small and exclusive. But then he talked to me maybe 4 or 5 days later. He called me over on the side and said he's going to allow me to invest with him. But he doesn't want other traders, other people to get jealous. So just keep it between us because he doesn't want other people to know. He wants to keep it small. And his big spiel there was that it was going to be safe. Don't expect to make as much as if the stock market's up. And during the 90s, by the way, it was a very big bull market. And the stock market was going up, 18, 20% a year for a while. So he was saying, the big thing is safety.
Fraud, lies, and a tragic end. The Bernie Madoff scandal shocked the world. But where is his wife today? The crisis of 2008 sent the global economy into severe decline. A crashing stock market and the plummeting value of retirement accounts were constant stories in the 24-hour news cycle for months, as panicked investors waited to see just how low the market was going to go. But if one story from this crisis overshadowed any of the panics, it was the Bernie Madoff scandal. Investigations into Madoff would eventually reveal that the once trusted Wall Street investment advisor had defrauded nearly 40,000 people, including citizens of 136 countries. It would seem that no one was immune to the wide net of fraud that Madoff had cast over the decades, as people from all walks of life found themselves on his list of victims. Madoff's historic scheme later landed him in hot water with federal authorities, as you'd probably expect if you were running a $65 million Ponzi scheme. In 2009, Madoff pled guilty to 11 federal charges that included investment advisor fraud and money laundering. Madoff was remanded into federal custody soon after to begin serving his 150-year prison sentence. He died in April 2021 from terminal kidney failure. Though a notorious white-collar criminal, Madoff was also a husband, father, and grandfather, and the publicity of the scandal took its toll on his loved ones, particularly his wife and sons. But who exactly was his wife, and what happened to her after the scandal broke? Ruth and Bernie Madoff were high school sweethearts. They married when she was just 18. In 1964, several years after graduating from Queens College with a degree in psychology, Ruth gave birth to their first son, Mark. Another son, Andrew, followed in 1966. Ruth later became employed by her husband's company, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, as the bookkeeper. Ruth was never charged with any crimes and received a $2.5 million settlement in exchange for surrendering her claims to her husband's $80 million estate. The news of her husband's wrongdoings devastated Ruth. In a 2011 interview with 60 Minutes, she revealed that she attempted suicide on Christmas Eve in 2008.
We decided to kill ourselves because it was so horrendous.
She and her husband each took a handful of sleeping pills, hoping to end their lives, only to wake up the next morning. She later stood by her husband throughout his trial and conviction.
It was very impulsive, and I'm glad we woke up.
Shunned from the Manhattan life that she once enjoyed, Ruth moved to Florida before later settling in Connecticut, swapping a multi-million-dollar mansion for a 1,000-square-foot apartment. It wasn't long before she was living a life of luxury once more, however. Ruth moved from her small apartment into a $3.8 million mansion in Old Greenwich in the fall of 2022. A source told the Daily Mail that the house is owned by Susan Elkin, Ruth's former daughter-in-law, and her husband. In the years since her late husband's conviction, Ruth has stayed out of the public eye. Her current 4,000-square-foot home has 4 bedrooms, a private dock, and windows that overlook Greenwich Cove. In 2021, the New York Post attempted to secure an interview with Ruth by sending someone to knock on the door of her new home. The woman who answered confirmed that Ruth was home, but stated that she was not available to talk. The rest of the Madoff family spiraled after the conviction of their patriarch. Mark Madoff died by suicide in 2010. The youngest son, Andrew, died from lymphoma in 2014. Peter Madoff, Bernie's brother, was convicted of securities fraud and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Meanwhile, Madoff's sister and brother-in-law, Sandra and Marvin Weiner, died from an apparent murder-suicide in early 2022. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988 or by calling 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255.
Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more explorations into the past. Let me know in the comments what city or topic you'd like me to cover next. Until next time, stay curious and stay strong. Make sure you subscribe.